If you're going to use tracks on stage, I think there's 5 things that you need in order to make that happen. Hey everybody, this is Will Doggett, and welcome to the From Studio to Stage podcast. Today we're going to talk about, again, what I consider to be the 5 things you need to use tracks on stage. Now, if you've kind of heard me teach for the past few years, you've seen some version of this, probably either in an article for Sweetwater or an old training video from oldtracks.com. But I've got a little bit of a new spin and update on this that I'd love to share with you. Now, I don't care if you are just getting started and you haven't bought a piece of gear or you're continually using tracks regularly. These are the 5 things I think you need to consider. Now, we could get really specific and say there's even more. Do I rack mount my interface? Do I not? But I want to try to give you kind of this basic framework of the 5 things you really need to consider, probably the 5 most important things I would say when you're building your rig. So let's get started here at the top. Now, if you're going to step on stage and use Ableton Live for tracks, most important thing you need is a computer. Now, here's my general rule. I think you need less computer power than you probably think you need. Now, if you have the budget to go out and buy the fastest computer available, Apple releases a brand new MacBook Pro, you go out tomorrow and buy it, then man, God bless you. Go for it. If you've got the budget and the ability to do that, then go do it. You're going to have a great experience. But you don't need a super fast computer to run tracks, right? The actual process of running tracks takes far less CPU power than you think. So this is something I talk about often. In fact, it was the very first episode of the podcast we ever recorded. I linked to that episode of the podcast. We're going to have a lot of links for this episode, by the way. But I linked to that episode of the podcast in the show notes that you can find wherever you're watching or listening to this on. And I really go through there for about 30 minutes and give kind of some specifics, I think, of when it comes to a computer. I want to give you kind of the quick rundown here, though. In general, probably the most important thing I think you can do when you're using your computer for tracks or looking to purchase a computer that you're going to use for tracks is get a SSD. Make sure you don't get a spinning hard drive, but get an SSD. If you're also going to use this computer for keys, right, you're going to do key sounds as well as tracks, then get more cores, right? If you were thinking of 4, but you're going to do keys as well, get 6 cores. Get at least 8 gigs of RAM. Don't go with 4. I believe even the minimum Ableton requirements, I believe, say 8 gigs. So start with that and then obviously go up higher. Now, I put all my computer suggestions together in a free gear guide. You can get it headed to, if you head to fromstudiostage.com/gear, you can download the guide and get started there. Again, completely free. Also, again, check out that first episode that I posted the links to. I kind of go in depth and give you a few more specifics, but you're going to want to spend a little bit of time on what computer should you get to make sure you have a computer that's powerful enough. But again, I want to encourage you, it's not going to take tons and tons of money. You don't need a computer probably as powerful as you think you need in order to do this. So check out that gear guide for specific suggestions and check out the first episode of the podcast that's linked below in the show notes to get a little more direction there. So number 1, you need a specific computer for on-stage use. Now, number 2, you need Ableton Live. If you're going to perform on stage with Ableton Live, you actually need Ableton Live. Now, it's worth noting there are 3 editions of Ableton Live. There's Ableton Live Intro, Ableton Live Standard, and Ableton Live Suite. I've linked to a YouTube video I did a couple months ago where I talk about kind of what's the best version to use for live use. How do you choose the version? Offer some pricing suggestions as well too. But here is my suggestion. If you're going to use tracks on stage, if you're going to use Ableton Live in a playback type environment, then I suggest using Standard. Here's the reason why. It removes all the track limits. It removes all the limits for scenes. If you're going to use Ableton for keys in any capacity, love running tracks. Love running keys in session view. If you're going to do a live looping setup in any form or fashion, I love doing that in session view using Looper and using clips and IAC driver to make that happen. But if that's you, then I would suggest getting Standard. Now, you could 100% get intro. You're limited to 16 tracks. You're going to have to do some creative kind of usage of trimming tracks down and grouping and summing tracks. Here's the thing, though. I think by the time you get your set ready to work in intro, I think you've spent more time than you probably need to. And if you just put the extra money towards Suite to Standard, and got standard, I think you're going to save money in the long run. Now, one thing I will mention here, I always try to mention this, Ableton is very generous upgrade pricing as well as EDU pricing. If you are in education in any form or fashion as a teacher or a student, please, please, please check out that EDU pricing and save on that. If you already have Ableton Live Lite or Intro, then check out the upgrade pricing to go from Intro to Standard. It's better than if you just buy Standard outright. So make sure you do a little bit of research into that before you dive in and start purchasing. I was on the call with someone on a training call, I guess last week with someone, and they were on Ableton Live 9 Standard. And as we were just talking through their needs and what they're looking to do, I really encouraged them to upgrade to Ableton Live 10 Suite. So they were logged into their account. I think you go to the shop area and you can get your upgrade pricing based specifically on you. So log into your account at ableton.com. I believe you click the shop link and that'll take you right there. And again, show you pricing that's specific to you. But don't forget about that EDU pricing. Make sure you don't forget about upgrade pricing. So if you're going to step on stage and use Ableton Live for tracks, you need a computer that's powerful enough, but probably not as much power as you think you need. You probably don't need to spend as much money as you think you need to spend. And in fact, the computer you have right now that you're listening to this on might be just fast enough. Secondly, if you're going to use Ableton Live on stage, obviously you need Ableton Live. And again, I would suggest Ableton Live Standard, but do not forget about upgrade pricing and EDU pricing. And check out the YouTube video I linked in the show notes for more info on that. And then third, you're going to need a way to get audio out of your computer. Now, on the original content that I did for this, I said something like an audio output device, and that's maybe the worst worded thing I've ever come up with in my life. But here's the thing. You've got to find a way to get audio out of your computer. So I think initially in just starting, you can just plug an 1/8 inch to 2/4 inch cable into your headphone jack. Hosa makes the Hosa CMP 153, 159. I've included the link to that in the show notes. Fantastic name, by the way. The Hosa marketing department continues to outdo themselves every year with the fantastic names they come up with. But this is just a headphone 1/8 inch cable. You've seen it all around. And then it goes to 2/4 inch cables. And so you would come out of your computer to 2 direct boxes and split your signal so that click and guide are on the left, or just clicks on the left and your tracks are on the right. Now I've included a link to a video that's going to show you how to set up click and guide for live performance in Ableton Live. Free video, free tutorial. It's kind of basic introductory kind of material there to get started. But I think you're probably going to want to look a little higher level, and the step up from using just the built-in headphone output of your computer is considering using a audio interface. Now, here's the thing with audio interface. When you do that, that opens up so many possibilities. One, it's going to allow you to actually use stereo sounds. So when we're just doing our headphone output left and right, then what we're essentially doing is we have mono signal that's click and maybe guide. Then we have a mono signal that's all our tracks kind of summed down. Now, if you're doing your summing natively in Ableton, you're not losing a side, right? It's not like you're panning and just getting the left side or just the right side. You're actually summing down to where that stereo signal becomes essentially like a dual mono signal, but you just get one signal, or one channel rather. So we have left side is click and guide, right side is tracks. Now, when we use an audio interface, what that allows us to do is say, okay, we can still use maybe one channel for click and guide, but then we can use 2 channels for tracks. So we can tracks left, tracks right. So I would suggest at least getting a 4 output interface. Don't just buy a 2 output interface and go, hey, this is a great investment. Yes, it's going to probably give you a little higher quality sound. You probably don't need to worry about the buzz that comes from your computer when you plug your power in. But I would suggest at least 4 outputs so you could start looking at doing stereo outputs. But here's the thing. If you go beyond those 4 outputs to, say, 8 outputs, then what you start to do is you can send even more stems, more outputs from your computer. So you could send your bass stem directly to the soundboard just like it's a bass guitar. It can be EQ'd as if it's a bass guitar. It could be sent to the subs if you're using an aux-fed sub system, sent directly to the subs just like a bass guitar would be. And you start to really treat tracks as if they are a part of the band. They're the 5th Beatle, if you will. So using a audio interface with multiple outputs, beyond 4 or beyond is really going to open up that possibility. It lets you mix stems and mix tracks as if they are a part of the band. It allows you to have stereo content. Again, you could do stereo pairs, you could do mono pairs, but I really would encourage you to do that. Now, if you're looking for some tips on how to choose an audio interface, I've linked to, I believe it's episode 2 of the podcast, one of our first episodes we did, where I talk about choosing an audio interface, and I share some tips and tricks that I think will help you make that happen. Now, in a moment, I want to talk about the last 2 things that you need if you're going to build a playback rig, if you're going to use Ableton Live on stage. But before I do that, I want to tell you about my friends at Clark. Now, here's the thing. If you are going to build a new room, if you're redoing a room, it takes a lot to put together AV needs for a room, right? You got to think, one, let's just talk about the audio stuff. We've got to think about our console. We've got to think about what type of connectivity we're going to use. Are we going to use Dante? Is this just analog? What brand console? How much are we going to grow? Can that expand? So many things to consider just even on the audio side. Then you get to the video side. And you go, okay, are we going to do cameras for this room? Are we going to do screens? Are we going to stream to another location, another campus? What in the world are we doing here? And we get into lighting and so many components. It's really easy for this to get out of hand and get overwhelming really quickly. But here's the thing. Let me tell you the secret. You don't have to be overwhelmed in this process. And the way to be not overwhelmed in this process is to talk to my friends at Clark. Here's the thing. Clark is an AV integrator, which means they're going to show up to your space. They're going to get to know you. They're going to partner with you to help create your new room or to help retrofit your existing room for all the AV needs, whether it's audio, video, lighting, whatever it is, streaming. They are experts in this. They do this week in and week out. They do this for churches all across the country, performance spaces all across the country, and they know exactly what they're doing. So again, here's the thing. If you're building a new performance space, you're building a new sanctuary for your church, a new auditorium at your venue, I want you to reach out and talk to my friends at Clark, because if you want to stop the overwhelm, if you want to stop the stress, you don't have to do this on your own. Reach out to my friends at Clark. Best way to do that is head to their website. It's clark.is. That's clark.is. You can click the contact link up, I believe, in the right-hand corner of their site there, and just reach out to them through the contact form. Let them know about what you're hoping to do. They'll set up a call with you. If it's a good fit for both of you guys, they'll come out to your space, get to know you, and again, craft a solution that's specific to you. You're not going to get some templated cookie cutter thing where they say, we've solved it. We know this is the perfect solution for your space. For every space, they're going to say, no, here's the perfect solution for your space. So that sounds like you. Again, don't be overwhelmed. Don't be stressed. Reach out to my friends at Clark, and you can do that by reaching out to them at clark.is. That's clark.is. I want to say thanks to my friends at Clark. They really are friends. I've known a lot of them since college. Went to college with them. They mixed sound for me, had to listen to my guitar often, and light me on stage and shoot me on video. They're great folks to have to put up with me for 4 years. So repay them by heading, because they had to deal with me, repay them by heading to clark.is to reach out. And I want to say thanks to Clark for sponsoring not just this episode, but all of season 2 and spoiler alert, season 3 of the From Studio to Stage podcast. So if you're going to use Ableton Live on stage, you're going to build a playback rig. We need 5 things. 1, we need a computer that's powerful enough, but probably doesn't need as much power as you think. 2, we're going to need Ableton Live, duh. I suggest standard. Don't forget about that upgrade pricing, EDU pricing. 3, we're going to need a way to get audio out of our computer, which could be as simple as using the headphone jack, but I would encourage you to go the route of audio interface so that you can, treat stems as if they're part of the band. The 5th Beatle. 4, you're going to need a way to control your tracks. Now, the cheapest, easiest way to get started with this is just do what I did when I started, which is basically reach over and press spacebar, right? I was an electric guitar player playing electric, MDing in a band in different situations and scenarios. Sometimes I was out front as the front man of the band, and I was triggering tracks. So I would just reach over, press spacebar, and Ableton Live, I would press 3 for song 3, spacebar, and go. Now, this was a great solution until I found myself in the gig I was at in Florida, the church I was at playing there. I was playing electric, rhythm electric, doing tracks, but I would switch from electric to acoustic back and forth. It started to become a lot. So it was too much for me to reach over and press spacebar. Now that maybe sounds a lot like a millennial with entitlement. And yes, I am a millennial with entitlement issues, but I realized, okay, to help make these transitions smooth and, not make the entire band wait on me to press spacebar just because I'm switching guitars, I need a MIDI controller. So I connected with my friends at Disaster Area Designs, DMC6D, been using that for years. Still my favorite MIDI controller as far as foot controllers go on stage. And I was able to integrate that into my setup, so it kind of disappeared. I was able to not look like I was checking email on stage, had a hands-free kind of setup using the foot controller, and it just worked really, really well. So here's the thing. I would encourage you to check out a MIDI controller. A couple suggestions on this. And again, I've linked to a couple videos below that are going to walk you through, one, how to set up your MIDI controller with Ableton Live, two, the MIDI mappings that I suggest making if you're going to use Ableton Live and use your MIDI controller on stage with Ableton Live. These are free tutorials that I put out on our YouTube channel. Check those out. And then I also, to kind of help, I guess, speed up the process of choosing a MIDI controller, I linked to an article I wrote for Sweetwater to give you some solutions and options on choosing a MIDI controller, a few things to consider. I'm going to give you just a couple here real quickly. One, choose a MIDI controller that fits into your setup, right? If you're a drummer, find something you can hit with your sticks. I talked to my buddy Richard, who's from Studio Stage All Access member, and Richard said, "Hey, I'm looking for a foot controller. I'm going to see him in I guess a couple of weeks at this point at a conference." I said, "I'll have my DMC6D with me," and he goes, "Great, perfect." He's got a drum pad, but he also wants something to use with his feet as well too. He's actually using a couple MIDI controllers, but the goal is it's integrated into his setup, right? He's finding something that works for him. If you're a keys player, find something you can sit on your keyboard, or use a small use the keyboard controller you already have, right? If your keyboard controller has faders and knobs, man, just go ahead and use that. The point of this, though, find something that integrates into your setup, because here's the goal in using a MIDI controller. It's not just to spend more money and find another piece of gear you've got to haul around from gig to gig. But the goal is to give you hands-free control or remote control of Ableton Live, and allow you to, again, not look like you're checking your email on stage. And I want you to find something that's going to integrate into your setup. It's going to allow you just to focus on performing. It's going to allow you to just focus on being a musician, being a playback tech, whatever it is. I have friends that run tracks, at front of house. They're a front of house engineer, and they've got a MIDI controller out there. Don't be hunched over staring at a laptop. Find a MIDI controller that meets your needs. Again, check out the article I linked in the show notes below, how to choose a MIDI controller, that I wrote for Sweetwater. Also check out the two tutorials I linked, MIDI mapping for live performance, as well as the using your MIDI controller with Ableton Live tutorial that's going to help. So if you're going to use Ableton Live on stage for tracks, you need a computer, probably less powerful than you think. You need Ableton Live. You should use standard. Check out the upgrade pricing and check out EDU pricing for that. 3, you need a way to get audio out of your computer. You could get started with the headphone jack, but again, I would encourage you to use an audio interface. Next, you need a way to control your tracks. I would suggest you get a MIDI controller and find something that integrates in your setup that lets you look like you're not checking your email on stage. And then 5th and finally, we need to talk about monitoring, and we need to talk about in-ears. So first, let's talk about a couple different in-ear solutions, right? We need to talk about a couple different ways that you can set up in-ears for your gig. One, obviously, we could do a monitoring system like the Digital Audio Labs Live Mix, which is a great solution. We could be doing wired in-ears that might just be coming off a headphone amp and a wired cable. Maybe you're using wireless in-ears and a wireless in-ear pack. That's possible as well, too. You need some sort of way set up so that you can hear click in your ears and hear the rest of the stuff you're hearing without everyone else hearing click, right? The way you can do that is by using an in-ear system and an in-ear setup. Now, if you're listening to this and you're going, man, we just don't have the money for this. We have no way we can go out and buy a live mix. We have no way we can go out and buy wireless in-ears. Well, the most inexpensive way to get started with this is a headphone amp, right? You could just connect a headphone amp to your digital console, and you could probably mix in-ears on your iPhone, iPad, directly through the console without having to spend tons of money. Persona says some great headphone amp solutions, HP2, HP4, and Behringer has some headphone amp solutions as well too. check those out. Really inexpensive, really affordable, and great ways to get started. Now, one of the things I talk often about and kind of questions people have is about how to improve your in-ear mix. So I actually put together episode 11 of season 1 of the podcast, this very podcast you were listening to. We talk about how to improve your in-ear mix. Here's what I love so much about that episode. I don't cover every single possible tip that you need that you could consider in improving your in-ear mix, but I give you really practical steps without having to spend a dime. Here's a few things you can do to improve your in-ear mix. And then I also talk about a few things, a few pieces of gear you could buy, a few changes you could do in your setup that require a little bit of money that will help you improve your in-ear mix. But check out that episode. Again, I linked in the show notes for this episode that will take you over there and finding that. Now, obviously, you not only just need some sort of monitoring system, whether it's a live mix or wireless in-ears, whatever it is, you also need actual in-ears. So I would suggest using molded in-ears. Find and get in-ears that are created specifically and custom to you. Here's what's going to help about that if you do that. If you create custom in-ears that are specific to you, then you're going to end up with a situation where it's going to block sound better, and you're going to end up getting a better overall sound by using custom in-ears as opposed to just in-ears that are universal. That's kind of the terms: universal, custom. Universal means they have foamies on them. I have some all clear universals that are great. They sound really good, but I also have all clear custom in-ears. And man, the custom in-ears cutout sounds so much better. I was using them this morning, actually mixing sound to kind of dial in some sounds a little better at front of house. And I took them out. I was kind of surprised at how loud it was because it had isolated so well. Scared me a little bit. But custom in-ears are really going to do a great job. Molded in-ears are going to do a great job to isolate sound, create a sound that's specific and custom to you. Pick something that represents your instrument. Well, a lot of people get into conversations of, if you're going to play bass, you need at least 4 drivers or 5 drivers. Someone the other day was mentioning, hey, and I heard if you're a drummer, you need at least 6 drivers. Here's something I love that All Clear says, and this isn't just kind of a marketing thing. No drivers are created equal, right? All drivers by all different companies, a 2 driver, a dual driver by this company is going to sound different than a dual driver by this company if they do it well. And here's the reason why. When you get drivers, essentially what they are is they're like really tiny speakers in a way that you get that you tune specifically to respond to specific frequencies a certain way. So you could get a dual driver that's just kind of flat, or you could get a dual driver that's tuned specifically for something. You're going to have a better experience with that dual driver that's tuned specifically for your specific needs. Now, here's the thing. I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I know there's tons of options out there. There's tons of great companies that make in-ears. I personally am a big fan of All Clear. They're great folks. They make great in-ears, all different shapes and sizes and price points, and they're incredibly affordable. Even their high-end stuff is really, really affordable. They did a great April Fool's joke this year where they said, we decided we're going to match our competitors' prices, and so it was like a price increase on everything. I thought it was really cute. I texted my buddy Andy and I said, okay, this is probably the best April Fool's joke I have seen. But I'm personally a big fan of All Clear. But I know there's tons of options out there. I don't want you to get overwhelmed by this. 2 things I want to share. 1, check out All Clear's site. I've included the link to their site below. They do a really good job of saying this specific type of in-ear is great for this environment, right? There's some pretty pricey ones that they say these are great for studio, but they're not great for live use, right? They're not just going to try to sell you the most expensive thing. They're going to tell you this dual driver setup is great for this. This triple driver setup is great for this. They're going to walk you through all those different scenarios. You'll see that I think they do a good job with kind of graphics and charts to represent how those different in-ears kind of represent different ranges. So check out the All Clear site. Again, I've linked to that below in the show notes. I also put together a webinar. Again, I think this was probably the first webinar I did for From Studio to Stage with All Clear. And this is on choosing the right in-ears. So I give a few suggestions, again, try to break down that myth of driver specific needs for specific instruments, and just talk about why I think All Clear is a great solution. But I give some specifics that you can apply no matter what in-ear brain you're using, whether you're using or Ultimate ears, whether you're using 64 Audio, Shure in-ears, Westone, or All Clear. Check out that webinar. Again, I've linked to that below so that hopefully you get some pointers and hopefully you get some tips that help you along the way. So here's the thing. Let's recap. Again, If you're going to use tracks on stage, use Ableton Live on stage, 5 things you need. One is a computer. It's got to be powerful enough, but it probably needs less power than you think. 2, you need Ableton Live. I would suggest getting standard. Check out the upgrade pricing. Check out the EDU pricing that's available for that. 3, you're going to need a way to get audio out of your computer. You could start with your headphone jack, but I would suggest using a audio interface. It's going to give you the most flexibility. Ultimately, check that out. 4, you're going to need a way to control your tracks. You could start just by pressing spacebar, but I would suggest a MIDI controller. Find something that suits your needs and fits into your setup really, really well. And then 5th and finally, you're going to need an in-ear setup. You're going to need a monitoring setup. So you're going to need a way to hear what you're doing on stage, whether it's a live mixer from Digital Audio Labs, whether it's wired in-ears, wireless in-ears, or even just a headphone amp. You're going to need a way to hear the content, and then you're going to need a great set of in-ears to make that happen. Again, if all this sounds overwhelming to you, or you're looking to upgrade your rig, change your rig, and need some suggestions, just head to FromStudioStage.com/gear. From StudioStage.com/gear. I put together a free gear guide where I give you my suggestions of the stuff I'm using, the stuff that I know my buddies on the road are using, people that are using these at churches all across the world. No matter what your setup is, this is gear that's been tried and true and tested, in all different types of venues. You can find that again for free at FromStudioStage.com/gear. Now, again, I want to thank my friends at Clark for sponsoring not just this episode, but all of season 2 of the From Studio Stage podcast. You can reach out to them at clark.is to start the conversation. Thank you guys so much for listening to this. Again, if you enjoy this podcast, do me a favor and give us a rating, 5 stars, hopefully. Leave a rating, a review. That would mean a lot, especially on the iTunes store. That kind of helps us in rankings and helps people discover us. No matter where you're listening or watching, Facebook, YouTube, give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this content. And as always, leave comments. I love hearing from you. I love hearing content suggestions. Reach out on social. You can find us pretty much on every social platform that exists. But thank you guys so much for watching and for listening. And we'll see you next week here on the From Studio to Stage podcast.